Imagine for a moment a world without oceans separating the continents. No Atlantic, no Indian, no Pacific. Instead, a single vast landmass stretches almost from pole to pole, surrounded by one endless global ocean. This was not a dream, nor a fantasy, but a reality hundreds of millions of years ago. The name we give it is Pangea, the All-Earth, a supercontinent that once held nearly all the land on our planet together as one. To picture it, you might close your eyes and think of the globe you know today. North and South America separated from Europe and Africa by the Atlantic Ocean. Asia and Australia with their coastlines facing the Pacific. Antarctica isolated far to the south. Now remove the oceans that lie between. Push the pieces together as though you were sliding a puzzle across a smooth surface. Fit Africa snugly against the east coast of South America. Pull Europe down until it locks against North America. Slide Antarctica up toward Africa's southern tip. The result is a single supercontinent, surrounded by a giant world ocean known as Pantalassa. This was the Earth of roughly 300 million years ago. Pangea was not the first supercontinent, and it would not be the last. But it is the one we know best because it left behind some of the most striking geological evidence, and because it shaped the course of life in dramatic ways. To understand it is to travel back through deep time, to a planet both alien and familiar, where the foundations of modern ecosystems were being laid and where continental drift was slowly reshaping the stage for future ages. But how did such a world come to be? The answer lies in the restless movement of Earth's outer shell, plate tectonics. The Earth's crust is broken into large slabs called tectonic plates, which float on the semi-molten mantle beneath. Over millions of years, these plates drift, collide, and separate. Mountains rise where they press together. Oceans open when they pull apart. Volcanoes mark the edges, releasing gases and molten rock. The map of Earth is never fixed. It is a living, changing surface. During the late Paleozoic era, these drifting plates gradually pulled together. The continents that we now call Laurentia, ancestral North America, Gondwana, a vast southern continent including Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia and India, and others like Baltica and Siberia slowly converged. It was a process spanning tens of millions of years, a slow dance of colossal landmasses inching across the globe. To human eyes, locked into lifespans of decades, the motion would have been imperceptible. But given geological time, the drift was unstoppable. By around 335 million years ago, these continents had drawn close enough to begin welding into a single body. The collisions were not gentle. When continental plates meet, they do not simply overlap like puzzle pieces. Instead, the pressure crumples rock upward into mountain chains. One such collision raised the Appalachian Mountains in eastern North America and their counterparts in Morocco and Western Europe. Today, those ranges are eroded and softened, but they once rivaled the Himalayas in height, testimony to the immense forces at work as Pangea was assembled. Imagine standing on that ancient earth, perhaps on the shore of a great inland sea. To the east, mountain peaks rise higher than anything on the modern American landscape. Their slopes are fresh, sharp, jagged. Rivers cut down their sides, carrying sediments that will form thick layers of sandstone and shale. Volcanoes occasionally break through the crust, adding ash and lava flows to the story. The sky is hazy with dust and gas. The air is rich with oxygen, perhaps as high as 30%, more than today's 21. Breathing might feel unusually invigorating. Fire would spread more easily in such oxygen, fueling vast forest blazes whenever lightning struck. As the continents continued to press together, low-lying basins formed, trapping water and sediments. Coal swamps grew in these basins, filled with dense vegetation. Giant ferns, horsetails, lycophytes. Insects thrived in this oxygen-rich world, growing to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans over 2 feet darted through the air. Millipede-like arthropods stretched over a metre long crawled through the undergrowth. Amphibians lurked in the shadows of the swamps, some the size of crocodiles. This was the Carboniferous period, and it set the stage for Pangea's final assembly. By about 300 million years ago, the supercontinent was complete. Nearly all the world's land was now part of Pangea. The great ocean Pantalassa encircled it, broken only by a smaller sea to the east, called the Paleotethys. If you had sailed across Pantalassa, you might have travelled for weeks or months without sighting land. The scale was immense. An ocean covering nearly 70% of Earth's surface, vast and deep. Its current circling the globe in patterns unlike anything today. Life in Pantalassa was rich with marine diversity. Ammonites, ancient relatives of squids, floated in coiled shells. Primitive sharks and bony fish hunted in open waters. Coral reefs built up along some of the continental margins, sheltering invertebrates and fish. Yet much of this ocean remains mysterious to us, its rocks now subducted or transformed by the relentless recycling of Earth's crust. The fragments we study are like torn pages from an ancient book, enough to glimpse the story but not to read every line. On land, the unity of Pangea created unique conditions. The sheer size of the continent meant that its interior lay far from the moderating influence of the sea. In modern geography, no place on Earth is more than about 2,000 kilometres from an ocean. But in Pangea, the distance from shore to interior could be more than double that. As a result, climates in the centre of the supercontinent were extreme. Summers were scorching, winters bitterly cold. Rainfall was scarce, and vast deserts stretched across the heart of Pangea. These deserts may have rivalled or exceeded today's Sahara in size. Sand dunes rose and shifted under relentless winds. Only hardy plants could survive, and only animals adapted to aridity could endure. Contrast that with the coastal margins. Here, the proximity of Pantalassa and the smaller Tethys Sea provided moisture. Lush forests grew in some regions. Rivers meandered across floodplains, depositing rich sediments. The landscapes were varied, mangrove-like swamps in the tropics, conifer forests in temperate zones, tundra near the poles. This diversity of habitats supported a wide array of life, even as the interior deserts stood nearly lifeless. From a geological perspective, Pangea is a demonstration of cycles. Before it, other supercontinents had formed and broken apart: Rodinia, Columbia, Nuna. After it, new ones would rise, perhaps including Pangea Ultima or Amasia in the far future. The cycle of assembly and rifting, known as the supercontinent cycle, appears to repeat roughly every 300 to 500 million years. It is a rhythm written into Earth's tectonic heartbeat, driven by mantle convection deep below our feet. For life, however, each supercontinent presents new challenges and opportunities. On Pangea, species once separated by oceans could mingle. Animals and plants spread across vast distances, encountering new competitors and predators. Evolutionary pressures shifted. Some lineages thrived, others dwindled. The fossil record reveals both expansions of diversity and catastrophic extinctions during this time. To study Pangea is to watch life adapt to a constantly changing stage. And yet, for all we know, mysteries remain. What did the skies look like, with different atmospheric compositions? How did monsoon systems sweep across a continent so vast? Did deserts pulse with brief wet seasons, allowing temporary blooms of life? Each layer of rock offers clues, but never the full picture. We reconstruct, we imagine, we test hypotheses, but the full experience of living on Pangea remains beyond us. Even so, closing your eyes, you might imagine yourself standing on a ridge in the interior of this supercontinent. Before you lies a desert plain stretching to the horizon. Sand ripples in waves under the wind. The sun beats down, unrelenting. In the distance, a solitary conifer stands, bent by arid gusts. Perhaps a synapsid, an early relative of mammals, pads quietly across the sand, its sailback rising above its spine, regulating its body temperature. The world feels quiet, empty, yet immense. You breathe in, and though the air is rich with oxygen, it carries no moisture, only dust. This is Pangea, a continent of extremes. And from that stillness, curiosity grows. If the land was united, if seas were vast and singular, how would life respond? What forces would shape its destiny? And what lessons might this ancient world hold for us, drifting now on continents scattered across today's globe? The story is only beginning. Pangea has formed. The stage is set. In the chapters to come, we will walk slowly through its climate, its forests and deserts, its oceans and skies, its creatures and catastrophes. Tonight, let the earth carry you back through layers of stone and time to a moment when all lands were one. When you think of continents, it is easy to imagine them as fixed. Mountains, rivers, deserts, and coastlines feel eternal to us because they do not shift within the span of a human life. Yet in geological time, continents are restless. They drift like rafts across the mantle, carried by slow but relentless convection currents deep within Earth's interior. This movement, plate tectonics, is the great sculptor of our planet's surface, and it is the reason why Pangea ever existed. Long before Pangea, Earth had seen other supercontinents. Rodinia, assembled about 1 billion years ago, held much of the world's land together. Before that, Nuna, sometimes called Columbia, served a similar role. Each of these vast unions eventually broke apart, only to reassemble in new configurations. This recurring pattern is known as the supercontinent cycle, repeating every few 100 million years. Pangea was simply one chapter in this ancient rhythm. The process of assembling a supercontinent is slow, measured not in centuries or millennia, but in tens and hundreds of millions of years. To visualize it, imagine continents as enormous plates floating on a viscous sea. They move only a few centimeters per year, about the rate at which your fingernails grow. Yet, given enough time, those centimeters accumulate into oceans closed, mountains raised, and continents merged. By the late Paleozoic era, roughly 350 to 300 million years ago, the conditions were ripe. A collection of major landmasses, Laurentia, Baltica, Siberia, and Gondwana, were drifting toward each other. Laurentia, which would become the core of modern North America, pushed against Baltica, ancestral Europe. Their collision helped form the Caledonian and Appalachian mountain ranges, still visible today, though softened by erosion. Meanwhile, Gondwana, a massive southern supercontinent that contained Africa, South America, India, Australia, and Antarctica, drifted northward. Piece by piece, the globe was drawing itself inward. The collisions that built Pangea were titanic. When continents collide, their rocks do not simply stack neatly. Instead, the pressure folds, thrusts, and uplifts layers of crust into towering ranges. In this period, entire belt of mountains sprang up, among them the Hercynian, the Ural, and the Alleghanian ranges. Each collision squeezed sediments, bent strata, and pushed ancient seabeds high into the air. If you were standing there, you would have seen landscapes rise in slow motion across generations, valleys turned into plateaus, and coasts uplifted into peaks. Evidence of these collisions survives in the rocks around us today. The Appalachian Mountains in North America, though now rounded and forested, were once jagged like the Himalayas. In Europe, the Variscan belt still reveals the scars of compression. And in Asia, the Urals mark the boundary between Europe and Siberia, a reminder of the time when land masses sutured together. These mountain chains are geological seams where continents once stitched themselves into a greater whole. It is strange to imagine that the solid ground beneath our feet is, in reality, temporary. The continents we know are mosaics of ancient fragments welded together in cycles of union and separation. South America once belonged to Gondwana, later drifted away, and now pushes slowly toward North America. India was once part of the southern continent, then raced north to crash into Asia, raising the Himalayas. Every collision leaves a trace. Crumpled rocks, metamorphosed minerals, fossil beds displaced far from their origins. Geologists read these traces like doctors reading scars, reconstructing histories long past. During the assembly of Pangea, the world was not quiet. Volcanic activity accompanied collisions, as molten rock found its way upward through stressed crust. Earthquakes shook coastlines. The atmosphere shifted as gases poured from vents. Oceans were rerouted, currents altered. Each change in geography carried consequences for climate, weather, and life. For ecosystems, stability was an illusion. The ground beneath them, though solid day to day, was in motion on scales beyond their comprehension. As Gondwana pressed northward, it finally met the combined mass of Euramerica, a union of Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia. This collision closed the Rheic Ocean, a once vast sea, and produced mountain chains that stretched thousands of kilometres. With that, nearly all of Earth's land was fused. By about 300 million years ago, Pangea stood complete, a continent so vast it spanned from the northern polar regions to the southern. One of the remarkable aspects of Pangea is its shape. It resembled a giant sea, with an open gulf in the middle where the Paleo-Tethys Sea nestled. The rest of the land arched around this inlet, creating a huge horseshoe of continents. This layout influenced climate, ocean currents, and even the distribution of species. The exact configuration changed over tens of millions of years, but the essential unity remained. One world continent, surrounded by one world ocean. To pause and imagine this is to confront scale. Today, if you were to drive across the United States from east to west, you would cover about 4,500 kilometres. Pangea stretched over 12,000 kilometres from one end to the other. Its width rivaled its length, encompassing nearly a third of Earth's surface area. No human could ever experience a journey across it, but in thought we can trace deserts, mountains, rivers, and forests linked together in a single sweep of land. The creation of Pangea also brought about new patterns of life. Species that had evolved in isolation were suddenly brought into contact. Amphibians and reptiles spread across regions where once oceans had barred them. Plants colonized new habitats. Competition sharpened, predation expanded. Some lineages flourished, while others dwindled in the face of new rivals. Biogeography, the study of how life is distributed, was profoundly shaped by this union of lands. Yet even in its grandeur, Pangea bore the seeds of its own destruction. The same tectonic forces that drew continents together would, in time, pull them apart again. Heat built beneath the crust, straining against sutures, preparing to rift the land once more. This is the paradox of supercontinents. They are temporary, always in motion, never permanent. If you were to walk across Pangea during its prime, the evidence of these collisions would surround you. Mountain belts, freshly risen, would dominate horizons. Rivers, redirected by shifting terrain, would carve new valleys. Earthquakes might occasionally rattle the ground. Volcanoes would punctuate the landscape, reminders that beneath the crust, energy still boiled. To live there was to inhabit a world of immense stability on the scale of days, but immense change on the scale of ages. As you rest tonight, imagine those drifting plates beneath your bed. They are still moving today, just as they moved hundreds of millions of years ago. The Atlantic Ocean is widening by centimetres each year. Africa is inching toward Europe. One day, long after we are gone, a new supercontinent will take shape. Perhaps it will be called Pangea Ultima, or Amasia, or Novo Pangea. It will not look exactly like its predecessors, but it will echo the same rhythm, the same cycle that has guided Earth since its youth. Pangea, then, is not only a story of the past, it is a window into Earth's future. The continents beneath us are still drifting, still colliding, still setting the stage for transformations yet to come. When you think of the ground as solid, remember, it is a raft on a restless sea of rock, always on a journey. The map we know is only one chapter in a very long book. And so the making of Pangea was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because it followed the natural processes of plate tectonics, the constant shifting of Earth's crust. Extraordinary because it created a land mass unlike anything we know today, a stage on which life would act out dramas of expansion, adaptation and survival. As we drift further into its story, the details of climate, ecosystems and atmosphere will reveal just how strange and challenging this supercontinent truly was. For now, let the image settle in your mind. Earth's continents sliding slowly across a mantle sea, converging with unstoppable patience. Oceans closing, mountains rising, ecosystems reshaping. Until at last, the world is gathered into one, Pangea, the All-Earth. Picture the map of Earth as we know it today, the Atlantic splitting the Americas from Europe and Africa, the Indian Ocean tucked between Africa, Asia and Australia, the Pacific, vast and deep, touching nearly every continent. Now erase those boundaries. In their place, imagine a colossal landmass dominating one side of the globe, with only a single ocean sweeping endlessly around the rest. This was Pangea. The sheer scale of this continent is difficult to grasp. From its northern tip, brushing the Arctic, down to its southern end, reaching Antarctica, Pangea stretched over 12,000 kilometres. Its width spanned almost as far. Unlike today, where seas and straits fragment the continents, Pangea was one immense expanse, linked together in an unbroken sweep of mountains, basins, deserts, and coasts. If you stood in the interior, you could be thousands of kilometres from the nearest ocean. In our modern world, that distance is impossible. No place today is more than 2,000 kilometres from a sea. But Pangea's centre was a landlocked realm, cut off from ocean breezes and rainfall. This geography shaped its climate in ways unlike anything we know now. Oceans act as Earth's air conditioners. They absorb heat, redistribute it through currents, and release it slowly, moderating nearby climates. But in Pangea's interior, far from the sea, no such relief existed. Summers grew scorching, winters turned bitterly cold. The absence of moisture meant rainfall was rare, leaving immense deserts. These mega-deserts stretched across what is now northern Africa, Arabia, and much of Central Asia. Sand dunes rolled like waves across the horizon. Wind swept freely, unbroken by mountains or oceans, carrying dust for thousands of kilometres. Evidence of these deserts survives in red beds, vast layers of reddish sandstone and siltstone deposited by rivers and wind. The red comes from iron oxides formed in arid conditions. These rocks, scattered across continents today, are geological footprints of Pangea's dry heart. When geologists trace them, they map out a desert system larger than the Sahara, the Gobi, and the Australian outback combined. It was a land where rain might not fall for years, and where only the toughest plants and animals could endure. Yet not all of Pangea was barren. Along the margins, where land met Panthalassa or the smaller Tethys Sea, moisture returned. Coastal plains held lush vegetation. River deltas fanned outward with the silt and nutrients. Forests of conifers, cycads, and seed ferns grew thick in some regions. Coal swamps still lingered in pockets, though they were less widespread than during earlier ages. Life along the coasts could thrive, even as the interiors burned beneath the sun. One striking feature of Pangea was its monsoon system. The sheer size of the continent meant that land heated far more quickly than the surrounding ocean. In summer, the hot air over Pangea rose, pulling in moist air from Panthalassa. This created seasonal rains along some coasts, drenching forests and floodplains. In winter, the pattern reversed. Cold air sank over the land, pushing winds outward, drying the interiors even further. These vast monsoons would have been more extreme than any modern counterpart, a planetary-scale breath of wet and dry seasons. Imagine yourself at the edge of a Pangean forest in midsummer. The air is thick with moisture, clouds towering high above. Suddenly the sky opens. Rain falls in sheets, pounding leaves and soil. Rivers swell, carving channels, spreading silt across fertile ground. For weeks, water is abundant. Plants shoot upward, insects swarm, amphibians fill the air with calls. Then, as the season shifts, the rains fade. Skies clear, winds shift, and the land dries once more. The cycle continues year after year, a rhythm set not by small seas, but by the breath of an entire supercontinent. Farther inland, however, the story was different. Here, no monsoon reached. The land baked under relentless sun. Temperatures in the deserts may have exceeded 40 degrees Celsius by day, dropping sharply at night. Sand dunes marched with the wind, burying valleys and exposing ancient rock. Life was sparse. A few conifers, tough and drought-resistant, clung to survival. Reptiles adapted to arid conditions crept across the sand, their scales conserving precious moisture. Fossil footprints show that synapsids, early relatives of mammals, also wandered these deserts, their tracks preserved in hardened mud. But overall, these regions were empty, hostile, and vast. Geology records these extremes. In places like the southwestern United States, today arid plateaus reveal layers of sandstone laid down during the Permian, when Pangea's deserts stretched across the land. The red cliffs of Utah, the mesas of Arizona, and the canyon walls of Texas are remnants of that ancient time. What now stands in silence once roared with desert winds under a blazing Paleozoic sun. Along mountain chains, the climate varied again. The collisions that built Pangea raised towering ranges, the Appalachians, the Urals, the Hercynian belt. These mountains influenced winds and rainfall, casting rain shadows, redirecting rivers, and carving microclimates. Valleys between peaks might have sheltered forests, even while surrounding plains lay dry. Rivers carried sediments down slopes, filling basins, feeding inland seas. Each range added texture to the vast expanse, breaking what might otherwise have been endless desert. The poles, too, had their influence. During Pangea's time, ice sheets waxed and waned. Around 300 million years ago, during the late Carboniferous and early Permian, southern Gondwana was covered in glaciers. Antarctica, South Africa, and parts of South America bore thick ice. Evidence comes from glacial striations, scratches carved into bedrock by moving ice, and from tillites, rocks formed from glacial debris. Imagine standing at Pangea's southern edge, watching a glacier grind slowly across the land, carving valleys, pushing boulders, leaving behind a trail of rubble. In contrast to the deserts of the equator, the south was locked in frozen silence. This juxtaposition, ice at the poles, deserts in the interior, forests along coasts, made Pangea a land of extremes. Few modern analogues compare. Our continents today are broken into smaller units, surrounded by seas, moderated by currents. Even the harsh Sahara lies within reach of moist Atlantic winds. But in Pangea, scale changed everything. The lack of nearby oceans created conditions we cannot experience now. It was a world balanced between abundance and scarcity, water and drought, heat and ice. The fossil record tells us how life responded. Plants adapted to dryness spread across the interior. Conifers, with needle-like leaves and protective cones, thrived where ferns could not. Seed ferns, with tough reproductive strategies, colonized marginal lands. Insects and reptiles evolved traits for conserving water. Amphibians retreated to wetter areas, limited by their dependence on moisture. Diversity was shaped by geography, high near coasts, low in deserts, specialized in mountains and valleys. For humans, imagining such a place is an exercise in scale. If you walked inland from a Pangean coast, you might pass through dense forest, then grasslands, then scrub, and finally open desert. Days of travel could lead only to more sand, more heat, more emptiness. The sense of isolation would be immense. Nights might bring cool winds under vast starry skies, but no relief of rain. The desert would feel endless, the horizon unbroken, the silence heavy. Only the hardiest forms of life would break it. In the coastal zones, however, life flourished. Rivers built deltas rich in nutrients. Swamps buzzed with insects, croaked with amphibians, rustled with reptiles. Forest canopies shaded the ground, leaves dropping to form thick layers of soil. Fires occasionally swept through, fueled by high oxygen, but forests regrew. These areas supported ecosystems that would one day give rise to more advanced reptiles. the ancestors of dinosaurs and mammals alike. The climate of Pangea also set the stage for great transitions. Fluctuations in oxygen and carbon dioxide levels influenced evolution. Shifts in rainfall patterns shaped ecosystems. Volcanic eruptions, tied to tectonic activity, altered atmospheres. Over millions of years, these changes would culminate in both expansions of life and catastrophic extinctions. The geography and climate of Pangea were not static. They were dynamic, oscillating, sometimes gentle, sometimes severe. To rest in this thought is to realise how temporary even the grandest landscapes can be. The deserts of Pangea are gone, their sands turned to stone. The glaciers have long melted. The forests have decayed into coal seams, buried deep. Yet their traces remain, allowing us to piece together the puzzle of a world that no human ever saw, but that shaped the path of all who came later. As you drift further into this ancient picture, imagine the winds of Pangea sweeping across a continent too vast to escape. Imagine the deserts glowing red in the sun, the forests steaming in monsoon rains, the glaciers grinding in silence. This was Earth, unified yet divided within itself, a land of extremes. And as the story of Pangea unfolds, these extremes will become even more important for life, for evolution, and for the history of our planet. Imagine standing in the centre of Pangea. No matter which direction you look, the horizon is barren. The nearest coastline is thousands of kilometres away. The wind carries only dust and heat. In the distance, dunes ripple like frozen waves across an endless sea of sand. This was the interior of the great supercontinent, a land of extremes, where survival demanded extraordinary resilience. The deserts of Pangea were unlike any found today. Modern deserts, like the Sahara or the Gobi, are vast, but even they lie within reach of moist winds from nearby seas. In Pangea, the distance was so great that oceanic moisture rarely penetrated far inland. Rainfall was scarce, sometimes absent for years at a time. Rivers dried before reaching the sea. Lakes shrank into salty basins. The result was a mega desert stretching across what is now North Africa, Arabia, Central Asia, and the American Southwest. It was one of the harshest environments in Earth's history. The geology of these deserts is recorded in thick layers of sandstone deposited by shifting dunes. In parts of the modern United States, Utah, Arizona, Texas, towering cliffs of red rock bear silent witness to this past. Their cross-bedded layers reveal ancient wind patterns. Each line is a frozen ripple, a snapshot of dunes that once marched across Pangea's heart. Iron oxides stain the sands red, giving the rocks their distinctive colour. To walk among these cliffs today is to stroll through the remnants of a desert 250 million years old. But what lived there? Life did not vanish entirely from these hostile lands. Plants adapted first. Seed ferns, cycads, and early conifers developed traits to conserve water. Their leaves grew thick and waxy, reducing evaporation. Roots dug deep into the soil, searching for hidden moisture. Some grew cones or seeds that could remain dormant until rare rains returned. When storms did come, brief but powerful, these plants took advantage, sprouting quickly, reproducing, and ensuring the next generation before the land dried once again. Among animals, reptiles were the true pioneers of Pangea's deserts. Unlike amphibians, which still relied on water to reproduce, reptiles laid eggs encased in protective shells. This freed them from ponds and swamps, allowing them to spread into drier environments. Their scaly skin reduced water loss. and their bodies tolerated heat better than their amphibian cousins. Small lizards scurried over dunes. Larger reptiles, some predatory, stalked the margins of oases. Fossil trackways preserved in sandstone show clawed feet pressing into damp sand, hardened later into stone. One of the most remarkable inhabitants was the synapsid Dimetrodon, often mistaken for a dinosaur, but predating them by millions of years. Dimetrodon carried a tall sail on its back, formed by elongated spines. The sail may have helped regulate body temperature, warming the animal in the morning sun and cooling it later in the day. Imagine this creature crossing a dry plain at dawn, its sail glowing in the rising light, its movements slow but deliberate. It was both predator and survivor in a land where life clung precariously to existence. Therapsids, another group of synapsids, also emerged in these arid zones. Some, like the stocky Lystrosaurus, were herbivores with sturdy bodies and tusk-like teeth for digging roots. Others, like gorgonopsids, were fierce predators with saber-like fangs. Together, they formed ecosystems adapted to scarcity. Each creature played its role: herbivores feeding on sparse vegetation, predators hunting the herbivores, scavengers cleaning the remains. It was a web of life, stretched thin, but still functioning. The climate shaped not only behaviour, but also evolution. In a desert, efficiency is survival. Animals evolved to move at dawn and dusk, avoiding midday heat. Burrows offered shelter from the sun and cold nights. Reproduction timed itself with rare rains, ensuring young hatched when food was briefly abundant. Some species likely migrated, moving between oases as conditions shifted. Fossils show adaptations like specialized teeth for chewing tough plants and skeletal features suggesting strong lungs to endure dry air. Life was not absent. It was inventive. The skies above these deserts also carried their own dramas. With oxygen levels higher than today during parts of Pangea's history, insects grew to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans approaching 1 metre could have darted above dunes, though they preferred wetter habitats nearby. Still, the thought of such giants passing overhead adds a surreal dimension to Pangea's deserts. Imagine lying in the shade of a conifer, watching a dragonfly the size of a hawk glide past, its wings catching the sun. Occasionally, storms broke the monotony. Moisture-laden winds from Pantalassa sometimes pushed farther inland than usual, unleashing sudden downpours. For a short time, dry riverbeds filled, basins became lakes, plants burst into growth, and animals flourished. Then just as quickly the rains vanished, lakes evaporated, leaving crusts of salt. Plants wilted, animals perished, and the desert reclaimed its dominion. These pulses of life may have been critical, allowing species to persist across millennia of aridity. Evidence for such cycles exists in evaporate deposits, layers of salt and gypsum left behind by drying waters. These minerals, now quarried in parts of North America and Europe, tell the story of temporary seas and lakes within Pangea's deserts. Each layer is a memory of water's brief return, a reminder of how fleeting relief could be. Beyond the physical hardships, deserts also shape the trajectory of evolution. In stable, resource-rich environments, species can specialize. But in deserts, where conditions shift and resources vanish, adaptability is key. The reptiles and synapsids of Pangea's deserts laid the groundwork for traits that would later define mammals and other advanced animals. Efficient metabolism, diverse feeding strategies, and resilience to environmental stress. In this way, the harsh interior was not just a place of scarcity, it was a crucible of innovation. Contrast this with the coastal forests of Pangea, where diversity was greater, but challenges were different. There, life could flourish in abundance, evolving along many branching paths. In the deserts, fewer species existed, but those that did were robust, shaped by necessity. This duality, lush margins and barren core, was a defining feature of the supercontinent. It created both hardship and opportunity, extinction and invention. As you imagine this interior world, picture the silence of vast dunes, the crackle of dry shrubs, the distant call of a reptile. The air is dry, the ground hot beneath your feet. The horizon seems infinite. Survival feels tenuous. And yet, in this unforgiving place, life persisted. It bent but did not break, adapting to a world that tested every limit. The deserts of Pangea remind us that even in the harshest conditions, life finds a way. The plants that stored water, the reptiles that conserved it, the predators that hunted with patience, all were answers to a single question. How do you endure when the land itself resists you? For hundreds of millions of years, these answers worked, sustaining ecosystems in the heart of the largest continent Earth has ever known. And so, as the story of Pangea continues, we move outward from these dry interiors. For beyond the deserts lay another world, the coasts, the rivers, the ocean of Panthalassa, where water and abundance returned. To fully understand Pangea, we must leave the barren centre and travel to its edges, where land met sea and where life once again flourished. From the dry and silent heart of Pangea, let us move outward, toward the edges of the supercontinent, where the land finally met the sea. After days or weeks of travel across deserts and mountains, you would arrive at a coastline unlike any on Earth today. Behind you lay an endless expanse of sand and stone. Before you stretched the infinite horizon of Panthalassa, the single great ocean that surrounded the whole of Pangea. The coasts of this supercontinent were zones of transition, places where the extremes of the interior softened into something more forgiving. Here, moisture from the sea supported forests and floodplains. Rivers, born in distant mountains, carried sediments across the land, spilling into deltas rich with nutrients. The air carried the salt of the ocean, breezes cooling the heat of the day. For life, these coastal zones were havens of diversity, sustaining ecosystems far richer than the barren deserts of the interior. Panthalassa itself was enormous. Covering nearly 70% of Earth's surface, it wrapped the globe in a single blue expanse. Unlike today's oceans, divided by continents into distinct basins, Panthalassa was unified. Its currents circled the world without obstruction, vast conveyor belts of heat and salt. These currents influenced weather along Pangea's shores, delivering rains to some regions and leaving others dry. The ocean was a climate engine, and its breath shaped the rhythms of the land. Imagine standing on a Pangean beach. The waves roll in, slow and steady, breaking against sand that has never felt the footsteps of humans. Fossilized ripple marks tell us such waves lapped ancient shores for millions of years. Perhaps a conifer forest grows just inland, its roots holding the dunes in place. Insects buzz through the underbrush. Amphibians crouch near tidal pools. And in the shallow waters just offshore, a different world begins. The shallow seas along Pangea's coasts teemed with life. Coral reefs grew in sunlit waters, though the corals of that time were different from those today. They built intricate structures of limestone, providing shelter for countless creatures. Ammonites floated through the currents, their coiled shells gleaming in sunlight. Trilobites, though declining, still scuttled along the seabed. Fish swam in schools. Primitive sharks, armoured placoderms, and early bony fish, crinoids, sometimes called sea lilies, anchored themselves to the seafloor, their feathery arms waving in the currents to catch plankton. It was a living tapestry, woven of creatures adapted to light, tide, and motion. Pantalassa's depths were mysterious. With such a vast ocean, much of it lay in darkness, far from continental shelves. Deep-sea life existed, but few fossils remain to tell us its details. The ocean floor itself has mostly vanished into Earth's mantle, recycled by plate tectonics. What we know comes from fragments preserved in ancient mountain belts, pieces of ocean crust caught in collisions, lifted high above sea level. From these scraps, geologists reconstruct Panthalassa like archaeologists piecing together a shattered phase. Yet we can imagine. Imagine descending into Panthalassa's depths, light fading as you go. The waters grow cold and dark. Strange fish glide through the gloom, their bodies adapted to pressure and silence. Perhaps giant cephalopods hunted in mid-water, their tentacles reaching through blackness. Perhaps delicate plankton drifted in unseen swarms, feeding chains of life from bottom to top. The ocean was immense enough to hold mysteries beyond even our imagination, and its ecosystems stretched from shallow reef to abyssal plain. The coasts of Pangea were not uniform. Some regions, facing steady monsoon rains, were lush with swamps and forests. Others, in the shadow of deserts, were dry and sparse. Still others lay near tectonic boundaries, where volcanic arcs or rift valleys shaped the shoreline. Each coast told a different story. In what is now eastern North America, rivers flowed from the newly raised Appalachians, carrying sediments to coastal swamps. In northern Africa, desert winds pushed sand into the sea, forming shifting dunes. In Europe, shallow inland seas flooded lowlands, leaving behind limestone full of fossils. Life along these coasts was not only diverse, it was transitional. Amphibians, which once dominated swamps, still lingered in wet habitats. Reptiles, more independent of water, ventured farther inland. Insects filled forests and skies, some of them giants thanks to oxygen-rich air. Synapsids and therapsids, early relatives of mammals, hunted along riverbanks. Predators left trackways in mud, preserved later as stone. Each tide, each flood, recorded small moments of life, fossilized into the record we read today. The presence of Panthalassa also influenced the climate of Pangea as a whole. With such a large ocean, heat and moisture circulated differently than in today's divided seas. Currents may have been simple but powerful, carrying warm water across latitudes. These flows helped drive the vast monsoon systems that soaked coasts and left interiors dry. In this sense, Panthalassa was not only a backdrop, but an active force, shaping rainfall, winds, and even atmospheric composition. Its vastness gave Earth a kind of rhythm, pulsing with tides and currents on a planetary scale. If you walked along a Pangean coastline, the sensory experience would be vivid. The crash of waves, the cry of reptilian predators, the buzz of insects. Trees swayed in coastal breezes, their roots holding soil against erosion. Tidal flats stretched for kilometres, dotted with shellfish and tracks of wandering animals. Sunlight glinted off ammonite shells rolling in the surf. The smell of salt and resin filled the air. It would feel both alien and strangely familiar, because our modern coasts still echo these ancient patterns. Occasionally, catastrophes struck. Volcanic eruptions along tectonic boundaries spewed ash, blanketing forests and reefs. Earthquakes jolted coastlines, sending tsunamis into shallow seas. Storms brewed over Panthalassa, their winds striking land with fury. These events left scars in rocks, layers of ash, sudden die-offs in fossil beds, storm deposits in sediments. Yet life recovered, filling niches again and again. The resilience of coastal ecosystems was tested but rarely broken. The interplay of land and sea also shaped resources we use today. Many of the world's coal, oil, and natural gas deposits began in these coastal zones. Thick forests grew, died, and were buried in sediments. Over millions of years, heat and pressure transformed them into fossil fuels. Limestones form from coral reefs and shell debris. Sandstones form from deltas. Each layer is both a geological memory and a resource modern humans exploit. Without Pangea's coasts, much of our industrial world would lack its foundations. From a broader perspective, the coasts of Pangea remind us of the balance between abundance and fragility. In the deserts, survival was scarce. Along the shores, it was abundant but vulnerable. Forests and reefs could thrive, but they were also exposed to storms, floods, and eruptions. Life clustered at the margins, always at risk from the planet's restlessness. The story of these coasts is one of both flourishing and impermanence. As you rest, imagine the sound of waves against a shore 250 million years ago. Imagine ammonite drifting in the shallows, fish flashing in the sunlight, insects humming in the forests just inland. Imagine the monsoon clouds building in the distance, promising rain. The coast was a place of renewal, of transition, where land and sea embraced. And beyond that horizon lay Panthalassa, the endless ocean, circling the globe in silence and power. Tonight, let that vision carry you. Waves rolling, forests swaying, creatures stirring along the tide. The supercontinent was immense, but its edges held beauty and diversity. Pangea was not only desert and hardship. It was also shoreline and abundance, a balance written in stone and fossil, a memory of life thriving at the meeting of land and sea. The air you breathe today contains about 21% oxygen. It is enough to sustain human life, but not so much that fires run unchecked or animals grow to enormous sizes. Yet in Pangea's time, the atmosphere was different. Oxygen levels rose as high as 30% during parts of the late Carboniferous and early Permian. At other times they fell to as low as 15%. These fluctuations shaped ecosystems in profound ways, influencing not just the size of creatures, but the rhythms of fire, climate, and survival itself. To imagine this world, inhale deeply. Then imagine the air carrying 1/3 more oxygen than now. Each breath would feel lighter, easier, invigorating. For insects and amphibians, with bodies dependent on diffusion, this abundance allowed extraordinary growth. Dragonflies with wingspans nearly a metre soared above forests. Millipede-like arthropods, stretched over 2 meters long, crawled through undergrowth. Spiders and scorpions reached sizes that today seem impossible outside of fiction. In an oxygen-rich atmosphere, their primitive respiratory systems could support such mass. It was a golden age for arthropods, and the fossil record preserves their legacy in coal seams and shale. The sight of these giants would have been striking. Imagine a forest clearing where a dragonfly the size of a hawk hovers, its wings whirring with a low hum. Nearby, a centipede longer than a person coils through damp soil. A scorpion the length of a dog emerges from beneath a log. For us, the scene would feel nightmarish, but for life then, it was normal. Insects filled ecological roles as pollinators, scavengers, and prey, just as they do today, only on a far grander scale. High oxygen also altered fire. Forests burned more easily, flames spreading quickly with each spark of lightning. Wildfires swept across landscapes, shaping ecosystems by clearing old growth and making way for new plants. Charcoal deposits from this time are abundant, recording ancient burns. The cycle of fire was both destructive and renewing, a natural rhythm intensified by atmospheric chemistry. Yet this abundance did not last forever. By the Middle Permian, oxygen levels began to decline. They dropped toward 15%, far lower than today. Breathing such air would feel thin, like standing on a high mountain. For animals adapted to abundance, it was a crisis. Giant insects dwindled, unable to sustain themselves. Some lineages vanished entirely. Others shrank, adapting to the thinner air. The reign of giant arthropods ended, replaced by smaller, more efficient forms. The world of titanic insects faded into memory, leaving only fossils as testimony. Why did oxygen fluctuate so dramatically? The answer lies in the balance between photosynthesis and decomposition. During the Carboniferous, vast swamp forests spread across lowlands. Plants grew, died, and fell into waterlogged soils where decay was incomplete. Over millions of years, this organic matter became coal. Each layer buried represented oxygen released into the atmosphere and carbon locked underground. Oxygen rose, carbon dioxide fell, and the planet cooled. But as conditions shifted, with swamps shrinking and fires more frequent, the balance reversed. Oxygen declined, carbon dioxide increased, and climates warmed once again. Carbon dioxide, the other great atmospheric player, also fluctuated during Pangea's existence. Periods of high volcanic activity pumped CO2 into the air, intensifying the greenhouse effect. Temperatures rose, ice sheets melted, seas shifted. Periods of quiescence saw levels drop, climates cool, and glaciers advance. The breathing of Earth was not steady. It was a cycle of gas, fire, and life. The consequences of low oxygen were dramatic. Animals needed to adapt or perish. Synapsids, ancestors of mammals, evolved more efficient lungs and circulatory systems. Some reptiles developed new metabolic strategies, giving them resilience. Evolution selected for those who could survive in thinner air, paving the way for future dominance. The giants of the Carboniferous gave way to the smaller but more versatile creatures of the Permian and Triassic. Even with thinner oxygen, life along Pangea's margins continued to flourish. Forests persisted, though their composition changed. Conifers spread, better adapted to drier climates. Seed ferns remained common. Cycads emerged, their palm-like fronds shading the ground. Insects survived, though reduced in size. Amphibians clung to wetter zones, while reptiles spread into new habitats. Diversity endured, even as atmosphere shifted beneath it. For coastal ecosystems, atmospheric changes shaped oceans too. With more or less carbon dioxide, seawater chemistry shifted. Acidification during high CO2 periods challenged coral reefs and shelled organisms. Extinctions rippled through marine ecosystems, only to be followed by recoveries. The The interplay of atmosphere and ocean was constant, binding land, sea and sky in a single web of change. Consider the sensory world of an animal living then. For a dragonfly in oxygen-rich air, flight required less effort. For a reptile, fire was a constant danger, forcing migrations and adaptations. For a synapsid, thinner oxygen demanded more efficient breathing. Each creature lived within an atmosphere that shaped not only survival, but possibility. The chemistry of air defined what was possible in body size, metabolism, and life strategy. From a human perspective, the fluctuations remind us of fragility. Our atmosphere feels constant, yet in deep time it has swung between extremes. Too much oxygen, and wildfires rage uncontrollably. Too little, and large-bodied animals struggle to survive. The balance we inherit today is only one point in a long arc of change. To study Pangea's air is to glimpse the delicate threads that sustain life. The age of giants passed, but its echoes remain. Fossil wings of dragonflies, fossil tracks of massive arthropods, charcoal layers in ancient rocks. All are reminders of when the Earth's breath allowed creatures to reach extraordinary forms. When you walk through a coal forest today, or see a dragonfly dart over water, you are witnessing survivors of a lineage that once ruled under a different sky. As night deepens, imagine breathing air richer or thinner than your own. Imagine forests that ignited more easily, insects that dwarfed birds, and animals struggling to adapt to a thinning atmosphere. Imagine the sky as both giver and taker of life, invisible yet powerful. The breath of Pangea was never steady, but always in motion, shaping the destiny of life across millions of years. And so, the story of Pangea continues, its atmosphere a reminder that even the air is part of Earth's restless cycles. As we drift further, we will step into its forests, where plants and creatures create worlds of shadow and abundance, writing the next chapter in this vast and ancient tale. Step now from the coasts and deserts of Pangea into its forests. The change would feel immediate. After miles of open sand and stone, you would enter shade beneath towering trees. The air would cool, filled with the scent of resin and damp earth. Insects would hum in the canopy. Reptiles would scurry across the forest floor. Here, in these green realms, life found shelter from the extremes of the supercontinent. The forests of Pangea were unlike the familiar woodlands of today. Flowering plants had not yet evolved. There were no grasses, no flowering shrubs, no fruit trees. Instead, the land was covered by seed ferns, conifers, horsetails and club mosses. These plants defined entire ecosystems, shaping the ground, the air, and the lives of creatures that depended on them. Seed ferns, known as pteridosperms, looked much like true ferns, with broad fronds that spread outward in feathery patterns. But unlike ferns, they produced seeds, a critical adaptation that allowed them to thrive in drier climates. Their seeds could survive longer, resisting desiccation, giving the plants an advantage in Pangea's unpredictable environments. These ferns grew in dense groves, their fronds rustling in the wind, casting shifting shadows on the ground. Conifers, ancestors of today's pines and spruces, also flourished. Their needle-like leaves conserved water, and their cones protected seeds. Conifers could grow tall, dominating the canopy in some regions. Imagine walking beneath a stand of these ancient trees, their trunks rising straight and tall, their crowns whispering in the wind. Resin oozed from bark, sticky and fragrant. Needles carpeted the forest floor, crackling underfoot. These forests spread widely from tropical coasts to temperate zones, offering habitat to a range of animals. Cycads with thick trunks and palm-like crowns grew alongside them. They were slower growing, their fronds stiff and spiny, adapted to withstand browsing by herbivores. In later eras, cycads would become even more prominent, but even in the Permian, they stood as characteristic forest plants. Their presence gave the landscape a primeval look, with rounded forms punctuating groves of taller conifers and ferns. Horsetails and club mosses, survivors from earlier Carboniferous swamps, still lingered. Some species grew tall, forming small groves. Others stayed low, covering damp soils. Their jointed stems and spore-bearing cones were distinctive, adding texture to the plant world. In wetter zones, they thrived, sending up green shoots in dense clusters. In drier areas, they retreated, replaced by seed-bearing plants better adapted to aridity. Together these plants created layered habitats. Canopies formed overhead, filtering light. Understories of cycads and ferns filled gaps. Forest floors held shade-loving plants, fungi, and decaying litter. Streams cut through, feeding wetlands rich with horsetails. This complexity supported diverse animal life. Insects buzzed through leaves, feeding on spores and sap. Amphibians lurked near streams. Reptiles prowled underbrush. Synapsids grazed on ferns or hunted smaller prey. Forests were places of shelter, food, and constant activity. Imagine standing in such a forest at dusk. Light fades through the canopy. A giant dragonfly glides silently overhead, wings catching the last glow. On the ground, a synapsid stirs, its sailback silhouetted in dim light. In the distance, the croak of an amphibian echoes from a stream. Leaves rustle as a reptile slips into cover. The forest is alive with subtle movement, every creature playing its role in the web of life. Coal deposits from this era tell us much about these forests. When plants died and fell into waterlogged soils, their remains often did not fully decompose. Over millions of years, these layers became compressed into coal. The Permian and Carboniferous were great coal-forming periods, leaving behind seams that humans would later mine for fuel. Each lump of coal we burn today is the residue of a forest that grew in Pangea's time. Sunlight captured in leaves hundreds of millions of years ago. Forests also shaped the air. Through photosynthesis, they released oxygen, influencing atmospheric levels. At times, their growth drove oxygen upward, fueling the age of giant insects. When forests burned or declined, oxygen fell. The balance of gases was tied directly to the health and spread of these ecosystems. In this way, forests were not just habitats, but planetary engines, breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. The animals that lived within them were as varied as the plants. Insects filled every niche. Beetles chewed through wood. Roaches and crickets scuttled in leaf litter. Giant millipedes fed on decaying plants. Spiders wove webs between trunks. In the air, dragonflies hunted smaller insects with precision flight. Each buzz and rustle was part of a larger chorus, a constant hum of life. Amphibians thrived in wetter pockets. Some grew large, over 2 meters in length, lurking like crocodiles in swamps. Their lives depended on water, so they stayed close to rivers and ponds. Their skin was moist and permeable, making them sensitive to changes in humidity. In the forest of Pangea, they found refuge where streams cut through, feeding on fish, insects, and small reptiles. Fossil trackways reveal their heavy bodies dragging across mud, tails leaving grooves behind. Reptiles, freed from dependence on water, expanded further. Small lizards hunted insects. Larger reptiles stalked amphibians. Shell-covered pariasaurs, bulky herbivores, browsed on ferns. Some grew up to 3 meters long, their bodies armoured against predators. Imagine such a creature pushing through undergrowth, fronds brushing its back, jaws snapping at tough leaves. It was not graceful, but it was effective, surviving where food was coarse and predators close. Predators included early therapsids, some with saber-like teeth. These animals, ancestors of mammals, combined reptilian features with innovations that hinted at the future. They hunted through forests, eyes sharp, senses keen. Their presence kept herbivores in check, maintaining balance in the ecosystem. Each forest was a stage where predator and prey played out ancient dramas, leaving traces in bones and footprints. The interplay of plant and animal-shaped landscapes. Herbivores trimmed vegetation, spreading seeds through dung. Predators controlled herbivore numbers. Insects pollinated and decomposed. Fungi broke down litter, recycling nutrients. Even in the deep past, ecosystems were complex, interconnected webs of energy and matter. The forests of Pangea were not primitive. They were dynamic, intricate, and resilient. But they were also vulnerable. Fire swept through regularly, fueled by high oxygen. Lightning could ignite vast blazes, consuming hectares of woodland. Charcoal in coal seams reveals how often this happened, yet forests recovered. Seeds sprouted, spores spread, shoots rose from roots. Fire was part of the cycle, destructive but renewing, shaping species that could withstand it. Some plants even depended on it, their cones opening only after heat released seeds. Seasons, too, influence forests. In monsoon regions, rains brought surges of growth. Streams swelled, wetlands expanded, plants flourished. In dry seasons, growth slowed, soils cracked, and some plants shed leaves. Animals adapted to these rhythms, breeding in wet periods, sheltering in dry. The pulse of climate echoed through the forest floor, written in growth rings and fossil layers. To picture it fully, close your eyes. Imagine walking beneath towering conifers, resin dripping from bark. Imagine cycads with stiff fronds arching outward. Imagine seed ferns with feathery leaves catching sunlight. At your feet, horsetails cluster near a stream, stems jointed and green. Insects dart and buzz, wings catching glimmers. A reptile rustles through leaves. The air smells of damp earth, resin, and distant fire. This was the forest world of Pangea, rich and alive, shaping the path of evolution. In time, these ecosystems would face challenges: volcanic eruptions, shifting climates, declining oxygen. Some species would vanish, others adapt. But for millions of years, the forests stood as green engines of life, spreading across coasts, mountains, and valleys. They were the lungs of Pangea, breathing with the planet, giving rise to new forms, sustaining the old. And as night deepens, let that image linger. A world of towering trees, buzzing insects, prowling reptiles, croaking amphibians. A forest vast enough to stretch across half a continent, old enough to last millions of years. In its shade, life endured, evolved, and prepared for what was to come. Pangea's forests were not only ecosystems, they were crucibles of change, writing chapters of Earth's story that still echo in the trees we know today. Step into the forests and open plains of Pangea, and you would find yourself surrounded not only by plants, but by creatures unlike any alive today. This was a time before dinosaurs ruled the earth. But it was not an empty stage. The supercontinent was alive with amphibians, reptiles, and synapsids, the strange and fascinating ancestors of both mammals and later reptiles. These animals filled every niche, from swamp to desert, from forest floor to riverbank. The amphibians were among the most visible in wetter areas. Some were massive, stretching over 2 meters long, with bodies shaped like crocodiles. They lurked in rivers and lakes, waiting to snap at fish or smaller creatures. Their skin was moist, their eggs still dependent on water, tying them to wetlands. Fossil trackways show them dragging heavy bodies across mud, tails leaving deep grooves. To encounter one would be to meet a creature caught halfway between the fish of earlier ages and the reptiles that would dominate the next. Among amphibians, the temnospondyls were especially prominent. With broad skulls and toothy jaws, they hunted in freshwater habitats. Some resembled giant salamanders. Others looked more like squat alligators. They breathed through lungs, but could also absorb oxygen through their skin, making them flexible in changing waters. Imagine standing by a riverbank as one rises silently from the shallows, its eyes breaking the surface, watching, waiting for movement. But amphibians, for all their variety, were limited. Their reliance on water confined them to certain environments. Reptiles, by contrast, were free to spread. With amniotic eggs encased in protective shells, reptiles could reproduce away from water. Their scaly skin conserved moisture, and their lungs were more efficient. These traits allowed them to colonize deserts, plains, and uplands. As Pangea's climate grew more arid, reptiles expanded their reach, becoming the true pioneers of the land. Early reptiles came in many forms. Some were small insect eaters, scurrying through underbrush. Others grew larger, feeding on plants or preying on fellow reptiles. Fossilized skeletons reveal slender bodies, clawed feet, and sharp teeth. In time, their descendants would give rise to crocodiles, lizards, turtles, and dinosaurs. But here, in the forests and deserts of Pangea, they were still experimental forms, branching into new evolutionary paths. Among the most striking groups were the pariasaurs. These bulky herbivores, some up to 3 meters long, carried bony plates on their skin like natural armor. They fed on tough ferns and cycads, using leaf-shaped teeth to grind foliage. Imagine a herd of pariasaurs moving slowly through a grove, their heavy bodies crushing plants underfoot, their jaws working steadily as they grazed. Predators would think twice before attacking such armoured giants. Another group, the synapsids, are especially important to us. They were not reptiles, though they resembled them. Synapsids were a separate lineage, and from them mammals would eventually emerge. In Pangea's time, synapsids were dominant, ranging from small insect eaters to large predators. Their skulls had distinctive openings behind the eyes, allowing for stronger jaw muscles. Their teeth began to specialize: incisors, canines, molars, an early step toward mammalian features. One of the most famous synapsids was Dimetrodon. Often mistaken for a dinosaur, it lived long before dinosaurs appeared. Dimetrodon had a large sail on its back, formed by elongated spines. Scientists debate its purpose. Perhaps it helped regulate body temperature, or perhaps it was used in display, signalling strength to rivals or mates. As a predator, Dimetrodon was formidable, with sharp teeth and a powerful bite. Imagine one stalking across a floodplain, sail rising high, eyes scanning for prey. Therapsids, another group of synapsids, showed even more mammal-like traits. Some were herbivores, squat and sturdy, feeding on low plants. Others were predators, with saber-like fangs. Gorgonopsids, for example, were fierce hunters with elongated canine teeth. Picture a gorgonopsid slipping through a forest, its gaze fixed on a smaller reptile. With a sudden leap, it strikes, jaws closing with deadly precision. These were ancestors of mammals, carrying forward adaptations that would one day shape us. Herbivores played their own critical roles. Lystrosaurus, a stocky therapsid, was among the most successful. With tusks for digging and strong beaks for cropping plants, it spread widely across Pangea. Fossils of Lystrosaurus are found in Africa, Asia, and Antarctica, showing how far it roamed. Herds of these animals may have grazed together, moving slowly across open ground, snuffling for roots and shoots. Their resilience would one day help them survive mass extinction when many others perished. The diversity of predators was equally impressive. Large amphibians ruled rivers, while therapsids stalked forests and plains. Reptiles developed sharp teeth and claws for hunting. Trackways show packs of predators moving together, perhaps coordinated in pursuit. Fossil bones reveal injuries and healing, suggesting fierce battles and survival against odds. Life was not peaceful. It was a constant struggle, shaped by climate and competition. Insects and smaller creatures filled niches, sustaining the larger ones. Beetles decomposed wood. Termites fed on plant matter. Dragonflies hunted mosquitoes and gnats. Ant-like insects formed colonies. Each of these tiny players was essential, forming the base of the food chain. Without them, forests would choke on debris, and herbivores would lack key food sources. The hum of insects was the soundtrack of Pangea's forests, a constant chorus of activity. Together these animals formed complex ecosystems. Amphibians dominated wetlands. Reptiles conquered deserts. Synapsids filled forests and plains. Herbivores shaped vegetation. Predators shaped prey. It was a balance, fragile but enduring, that lasted millions of years. The fossil record shows moments of stability and sudden shifts, extinctions followed by recoveries, diversity rising and falling like tides. To walk through Pangea as a silent observer would be to witness this balance firsthand. You might hear the croak of a temnospondyl in a swamp, then turn to see a lizard dart through ferns. In the distance, the heavy tread of pliosaurs might rumble through underbrush, while above, dragonflies hovered in shafts of sunlight. Each sound, each movement, would remind you that the land was alive, filled with creatures adapting to a restless world. But this world was not static. Climates shifted, oxygen levels changed, and tectonic activity reshaped landscapes. Each change demanded adaptation. Some lineages succeeded, others failed. Dimetrodon would vanish long before dinosaurs arose. Gorgonopsids, too, would disappear. Yet Lystrosaurus would endure, carrying forward into a new era. The story of Pangea's animals is not only one of diversity, but of resilience and transformation. As you rest tonight, imagine these creatures in their prime. Amphibians lurking in rivers, reptiles basking on dunes, synapsids prowling forests. Imagine the sounds of ferns brushing against scaly hides, the hiss of predators, the buzz of insects. The supercontinent was not silent. It was alive with movement, calls and struggles. It was a stage where evolution rehearsed many forms, preparing for the ages yet to come. And so Pangea's animal kingdom thrived, strange, diverse, and vital. It set the foundation for what would follow: the rise of dinosaurs, the survival of mammals, and the continued drama of life on shifting continents. The stage was vast, the actors varied, and the play unending. This was the life of Pangea, written in bone and stone, echoing still in the creatures that roam our world today. The history of life on Earth is not a straight line of progress. It is punctuated by catastrophes, sudden events that wiped away vast portions of species, reshaping ecosystems and resetting the stage for what followed. And among these events, none was greater than the mass extinction at the end of the Permian period, about 252 million years ago. It is often called the Great Dying because no other extinction in Earth's history was as severe. Up to 90% of marine species and 70% of land species vanished. Entire groups disappeared forever. For Pangea, it was a turning point, one that transformed the supercontinent from a thriving world into one marked by emptiness and recovery. To understand why it happened, we must step back into the late Permian. Pangea was fully assembled, stretching across much of Earth's surface. Its deserts were vast, its coasts diverse, its forests alive with reptiles, synapsids, and amphibians. But beneath the surface, forces were building. Volcanic activity in what is now Siberia erupted with staggering intensity. Over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, lava flows covered millions of square kilometers, creating a region geologists call the Siberian Traps. The eruptions released immense amounts of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. These gases triggered a cascade of environmental changes that proved deadly to life. The release of carbon dioxide drove global warming. Temperatures on land rose sharply, stressing ecosystems already adapted to extremes. Oceans warmed, reducing the ability of water to hold oxygen. Marine life suffered as deoxygenated dead zones spread. Coral reefs collapsed, fish populations dwindled, and trilobites, once dominant for hundreds of millions of years, vanished entirely. Imagine standing at a Pangean shoreline as the ocean turned murky, fish floating lifeless, coral bleaching and crumbling. The richness of marine ecosystems dissolved into silence. Methane added to the crisis. As temperatures rose, methane trapped in permafrost and ocean sediments may have been released, amplifying warming in a runaway feedback loop. The atmosphere grew hotter still, climates destabilized further, and extinction accelerated. Insects, once abundant and diverse, suffered a major collapse, the only known mass extinction to deeply affect them. Forests withered, wildfires spread, and ecosystems fell apart. On land, synapsids and reptiles were devastated. The mighty gorgonopsids, apex predators with saber-like teeth, disappeared. Dimetrodon and its relatives were already gone by then, but other therapsids perished in huge numbers. Only a few, like Lystrosaurus, survived and spread widely in the aftermath. Herbivores died as plants failed, and predators followed. Amphibians, already confined to wetlands, lost much of their diversity. The land grew eerily quiet, the abundance of the late Permian replaced by desolation. The evidence of this crisis is etched into rocks around the world. At the boundary between the Permian and Triassic, geologists find a thin but unmistakable layer of disruption. Fossil diversity drops suddenly. Coal deposits, once common, vanish for millions of years, suggesting forests collapsed entirely. Carbon isotope ratios shift, marking a surge in greenhouse gases. Ash layers confirm volcanic activity. In places like South Africa, China and Russia, fossil beds show the abrupt disappearance of once thriving communities. It is as if the world blinked and most life was gone. Why was this extinction so severe? Part of the answer lies in Pangea itself. The supercontinent created extremes in climate, leaving species already stressed by aridity, heat, and limited habitats. When global warming and ocean anoxia struck, few organisms could cope. The connectedness of Pangea may also have allowed diseases to spread more easily, as once isolated populations came into contact. The result was a cascade of collapse, where the failure of one ecosystem led to the unravelling of others. On such a vast, unified continent, there were fewer refuges to which life could retreat. Recovery from the Great Dying was slow. For millions of years, ecosystems were sparse. Diversity remained low. The coal gap, a period when no coal deposits formed, lasted almost 10 million years, indicating that lush forests did not return quickly. Instead, landscapes were dominated by hardy survivors like Lystrosaurus, which spread across much of Pangea, filling ecological roles left empty. Reptiles gradually diversified, giving rise to new lineages. Over time, these would include the first dinosaurs and mammals. But for a long while, Earth was quiet, its biosphere rebuilding from near ruin. The Great Dying reminds us that extinction is not just an end, but also a reset. The loss of so many lineages cleared ecological space for new ones. The age of reptiles, and eventually the rise of dinosaurs, became possible only because earlier groups vanished. Mammals, too, trace their origins through survivals of this crisis. In this way, catastrophe shaped the future as much as it destroyed the past. Imagine walking across Pangea just after the extinction. Forests are gone, replaced by scrub and bare soil. Rivers run through valleys with little life along their banks. Few animal sounds break the silence. A herd of Lystrosaurus shuffles across the plain, tusks digging for roots. But predators are scarce. Insects buzz weakly, their diversity a shadow of what once was. The land feels empty, haunted by absence. Only with time will new ecosystems emerge, filling the void. Geologists call the Permian Triassic extinction the most severe of Earth's Big Five extinctions. Later events, like the one that ended the dinosaurs, were devastating, but none matched the scale of the Great Dying. It is a stark reminder of how fragile life can be when Earth's systems shift too quickly. Volcanoes, gases, climate, and geography aligned to push the planet past thresholds. For millions of years afterward, the Earth bore the scars. Today, scientists study this event not only to understand the past, but also to glimpse the future. The release of carbon dioxide, the warming of climate, the collapse of ecosystems, these patterns resonate uncomfortably with modern concerns. Though the scales differ, the lessons remain. Life is resilient, but it is not invincible. When change is too rapid or too extreme, even the mightiest lineages can fall. As you rest tonight, let the image of Pangea during the Great Dying settle in your mind. A vast continent, once filled with forests, rivers, deserts and creatures, suddenly reduced to silence. Oceans emptying of life, skies thick with ash, landscapes stripped bare. And yet, even in this bleakness, seeds of renewal remained. Survivors carried forward, evolution reshaped, and Earth's story continued. The planet turned, the sun rose, and life began again. The Great Dying was not the end. It was a passage, a trial by fire and heat and emptiness. From it, new chapters would emerge. The rise of dinosaurs, the spread of mammals, and eventually us. The memory of that ancient crisis is written in stone, a whisper across time, that life endures even through its darkest hours. When you look at a world map today, the arrangement of continents feels natural. North and South America on one side, Africa and Europe on another, Asia stretching eastward, and Australia and Antarctica at the far corners. But this familiar pattern is only a moment in Earth's long story. The continents were once joined as one, Pangea, and though the supercontinent eventually broke apart, its legacy remains in the landscapes, oceans, and life we know now. The breakup of Pangea began in the early Jurassic, around 175 million years ago. Deep within Earth, heat and pressure built up, stretching and cracking the crust. Rift valleys formed, widening slowly into new oceans. The Atlantic was born as North America pulled away from Africa and Europe. The Indian Ocean opened as Gondwana fragmented. Over tens of millions of years, Pangea's unity dissolved, and the drifting fragments became the continents we recognise today. Imagine standing on Pangea during this time. At first, the land beneath your feet might tremble with earthquakes as faults opened. Lava erupted, filling rifts with dark basalt. Valleys deepened, rivers shifted, and coastlines changed shape. In time, narrow seas formed, cutting through land. What had been an unbroken expanse became dotted with growing waterways. Slowly, the earth redrew itself, not in days or centuries, but over spans of millions of years. This process of rifting shaped more than geography, it shaped life. As continents split, species were divided. Populations that once mingled freely became isolated. In isolation, they evolved separately, giving rise to new forms. Dinosaurs in North America diverged from those in Africa. Plants in India evolved apart from those in Australia. The diversity of modern life owes much to this separation. Without Pangea's breakup, the patterns of evolution would have been very different. The creation of new oceans also changed climates. Where once Panthalassa had been a single vast expanse, new seas and currents appeared. The Atlantic developed its own circulation, redistributing heat. Monsoons shifted. Coastal habitats expanded, providing new opportunities for marine life. Coral reefs spread, fish diversified, and new ecosystems flourished. The oceans as we know them today, distinct, dynamic, and rich, were born from the slow fracture of the supercontinent. Geological evidence of Pangea's breakup surrounds us. The Appalachian Mountains in North America were formed when continents collided, then left behind when they separated. Matching rocks and fossils appear on opposite sides of the Atlantic, proof that the continents were once joined. Basalt flows in places like the east coast of North America and Morocco mark the initial rifting, frozen lava from the moment of separation. These clues, scattered across the globe, are pieces of a puzzle geologists have carefully reassembled. The legacy of Pangea also lives in the distribution of species. Fossils of Lystrosaurus, found in both Africa and Antarctica, show how animals once roamed freely across connected lands. The presence of similar plant fossils in South America, Africa, India, and Australia tells the same story. Even today, the distribution of marsupials in Australia and South America reflects ancient connections through Gondwana, the southern part of Pangea. The map of life still carries the fingerprints of the supercontinent. For humans, the idea of Pangea is both scientific and poetic. It reminds us that the continents we live on are not fixed, but moving. The ground beneath us is not permanent, but drifting slowly on molten rock. Cities, nations, and coastlines are temporary shapes in a much longer story. Millions of years from now, the continents will gather again, perhaps forming a new supercontinent. Scientists call this hypothetical future landmass Pangea Proxima, a reminder that Earth's cycle of assembly and breakup continues without end. The breakup of Pangea also shaped resources we depend on today. As continents drifted, sediments accumulated in new basins, forming deposits of oil, gas, and coal. Mountain ranges rose where plates collided, creating landscapes we now treasure for their beauty and minerals. The very distribution of land and sea, agriculture and climate is tied to these ancient tectonic shifts. When we farm, build or mine, we are interacting with the legacy of a world that existed hundreds of millions of years ago. But beyond resources and geography, Pangea left another gift: perspective. It teaches us that the Earth is not static. It shifts, breathes, and remakes itself. Deserts become forests, oceans rise and fall, continents join and part. Species rise, thrive, and vanish, while others take their place. The stability we feel in our lifetimes is only a brief pause in the restless motion of the planet. To know Pangea is to understand deep time, the vast scales on which Earth operates. As we close this journey, imagine Earth not as it is now, but as it once was. One supercontinent, bound together, surrounded by a single endless ocean. Deserts in the centre, forests along the coasts, rivers winding through mountains, creatures prowling in every corner. Then imagine it breaking, pieces drifting apart, carried slowly into the arrangement we see on maps today. That slow movement, invisible day to day, has shaped everything, from climate to species, from landscapes to human history. And as you let these thoughts settle, remember that the planet is still moving. Africa is slowly colliding with Europe, raising the Alps higher each year. The Atlantic is widening as America drifts from Europe. Australia is creeping northward toward Asia. The map of the future will be as strange to us as Pangea is now. The story is not over, it is simply unfolding. The legacy of Pangea is all around us, in mountains, fossils, oceans, and air. It is written in rocks and recorded in DNA. It is the reason continents fit together like pieces of a puzzle, the reason life is distributed as it is, the reason our planet looks as it does. To study Pangea is to study ourselves, because we live in the world it created. And so, as this long story comes to rest, let your thoughts drift with the slow movement of continents. The planet never sleeps, but you can. Let the earth keep turning while you rest, knowing that the ground beneath you is ancient, and the story of Pangea is part of the story of home.